The screwdriver went into my husband's boat up to the handle, the way it goes into cake. The man holding it pulled it back out, turned it over, and said nothing. I was standing in a boatyard in Bauan, Batangas, looking at a hole in a thing I had not known existed 5 weeks before. Jean had been building a boat. Half of it finished, 3 years of our money in it, and I found out about it after he was dead, from the people who wanted to sell it out from under me. That was June 30th. It started in May, in my coat, at the kitchen counter in Spokane. The envelope was addressed to my husband, who had been dead 6 weeks, and it came from a boatyard in the Philippines. Final demand, in capital letters. I read 4 lines down to a figure, 386,000 pesos, and then 90 days, after which they would sell the vessel at public auction. The letter ran 2 pages, and it called him the late Eugene Marsh. It listed things with dates going back to January of last year. Yard fees, storage, hauling, materials advanced. It said they had a right of retention over the vessel under Article 1731 of their Civil Code until they were paid. At the bottom, in blue ballpoint, C.C. Barangay Captain. I stood there and thought, I don't know this account. It turned into a different question inside a week, and that one did not change shape for 3 months. It only got heavier. Do I go and finish a boat I had never heard of for a man who isn't here to explain one word of it? Or do I let them sell it for the debt and go be a widow in Spokane like a sensible person? I'm 72. My name is Nora, which turned out to be the one thing about me that gave nobody in Bauan any trouble at all. Every second person said it back to me with the actress's whole name attached, and Jean would have gotten 40 years out of that. My first feeling wasn't grief. It was the feeling you get at work when a number lands on your desk that belongs to no job you know about. 31 years, I was the office manager for a mechanical contractor on Sprague Avenue. I know what an invoice looks like when it's honest and what one looks like when it isn't. The next morning, I went out to his shop. It's a 2-car garage on the alley, and nobody but Jean ever went in there, and I had not opened the door since April. On the bench, under a coffee can of drill bits, there was a manila folder an inch thick. Delivery slips from a sawmill with a Batangas address. A rental book for a chainsaw by the day, 31 days across 2 years, in a hand that wasn't his. And on the back of an envelope, in his pencil, a column of figures he had added 4 times and gotten a different answer twice. So I got the bank statements out because that column was wrong and I wanted the right one. Jean liked paper and I never fought him on it, so it was all in a drawer. I made coffee and started 3 springs back and worked forward with a ruler under each line, the way I'd have done it for a job that came in over. There they were, not hidden, not disguised. A wire every couple of months to a remittance company and amounts that were never round. 680, 920, 1,650. The biggest was 4,100, and in November I remembered as the month the furnace people came out twice. I ran the tape 3 times because I didn't believe it the first 2. $23,700 in 34 months, out of the money he'd rolled into our joint account when he retired, which was $91,000 the year he started. It was our money, out of an account with both our names on it. And if I had ever once turned a statement over and added the column, I'd have found it in 10 minutes. I didn't. He handled anything to do with his brother's truck and the shop, and I handled the rest. And in 46 years, I had never had a reason to check. So I'd been paying for a boat for 3 years. The first 2 of those years, there was no boat to look at. There were trees coming down on somebody's land and lumber stacked in a shed in Bauan, drying, because that is how you get a plank 13 meters long that won't move on you later. I'd been paying for it the same as him. I just didn't know I was standing in a boatyard. He was gone April 11th, at home, on an ordinary Saturday, with no warning at all. I'll say that once, and then I'm going to leave it alone, because this isn't that story, and he'd have hated a bit being that story. I called my daughter that night. Paula's 44, and she's a scheduler at a hospital in Boise, which means she has no patience for anything that doesn't end. She listened all the way through, and then she said, "Right, this is what you do. You write them a letter saying he's gone, you're not paying it, and they can do whatever they like with a pile of wood on the other side of the world. Then you stop thinking about it." I said, "I'd like to see it." She said, "See what?" "Mom, there's nothing to see. There's a bill." We got off the phone bad. Then I did the sensible thing, which surprised us both. I found an attorney downtown who gave me 40 minutes for $200, and he told me the most important sentence anybody said to me all year. He said, "This is not your debt." He said, "I can't advise you on their law, and I'm not going to pretend to. But I made 2 calls while you were parking, and every book says the same thing. That yard is not coming after you. They cannot reach $1 in Washington state, and they know it. What they have is a hold on the object. Their code lets a man who has worked on a thing keep the thing until he's paid, and that is the entire extent of their power, and also the whole problem, because the boat is the only place they can be paid out of. They're not threatening you," he said. "They're threatening the boat. They can sell it, and that ends it." I said, "And if it sells for more than the bill?" He said, "Then they keep the difference, too." I remember where I was standing when I understood that. It meant nobody at that yard had one reason on earth to get a good price. The cheapest, cleanest thing they could do was sell it quiet to somebody they knew for the number on the paper and close the file. That Friday I called the yard. It's the middle of their afternoon when it's the middle of my night, so I sat in the dark with a legal pad. A woman answered on the 4th ring. She said the yard's name and then, "Yes, ma'am," in a way that told me she'd already guessed who this was. Her name was Feely. Everybody on that road called her Aling Feely, so that's what I called her, and she never corrected me. She was polite and gave me nothing. She was sorry about my husband. "The boat is here. We cannot keep it for free. We have 4 cradles, and this one has been under the roof 14 months. And then she said the thing that put me on an airplane. She said, "Ma'am, do you know what it looks like?" I said no. She said, "Then you should come and look at it, because after August 24th, you will not be able to." I booked for 2 weeks. I'm not softening that now to make myself sound better. 2 weeks. I put a hold on the mail, told my neighbor which day the recycling goes out. I bought a return for June 19th, and I told Paula I'd be home before her birthday. Bauan is about 2 hours south of Manila if the road behaves, and it did not. A working town on a bay with fuel tanks out on the point and a big international port down the coast, and nobody has ever put it on a postcard. I got there June 5th with one suitcase and a folder. The yard was down a lane off the shore road, past a sorry store and a lot where a man was welding with no mask on. There was no sign. 4 wooden cradles under a long roof of nipa and rusted sheet, and a dog, and a smell of sawdust and low tide and diesel, with something Swedish under it that turned out to be epoxy. 3 of the cradles were empty. The boat was on the 4th one, up on blocks, and the first 3 seconds of it are the part I've gone over most since. It was beautiful. I don't know anything about boats. I've been out on a rowboat on Lake Coeur d'Alene, but you can stand under a thing 13.5 meters long that somebody shaped out of trees with his hands and know it, the same way you know a face is a good face before anyone tells you a thing about the person. The planking was Lien, that reddish wood, laid in long strakes and fastened with copper nails hammered over flat on the inside. The keel was one piece, one log the whole length of her. The bow came up out of where the water would be in a curve that didn't have a straight inch anywhere in it. Then I walked around the other side. There were no outriggers, and on that kind of boat, the katig, the 2 long bamboo floats out on crossbooms either side, are the whole reason it doesn't lie down in a swell. There was no engine. There wasn't even a hole for one. The deck stopped halfway back in a raw edge of frames, like ribs. Down in the bottom there was standing rainwater with mosquito larvae in it, and along the starboard side the wood had gone dark and furred because there is a hole in that roof and there has been for a long time. Aling Feely came out with a folder of her own. She's about 58, built like a fire hydrant, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She didn't offer me coffee for 20 minutes, and when she did, it was because she wanted me sitting down for the numbers. She gave me the date first, August 24th. 90 days from the day a courier got a signature in Spokane, and she had a copy of the slip. She put it on the table in front of me with my own name printed on the signature line. She didn't tell me what happens on the 25th. She didn't have to, and she knew I knew, and that was the first thing about her I liked. Then I asked the question I had flown 7,000 miles to ask, which was, "Can I see the drawings?" She looked at me, then she looked at the boat. Then she said, "Allah, ma'am, what drawings?" I heard Allah 400 times that summer, and it means about 9 different things depending on the face. I said, "The plans, the design." She said, "There are no plans. There were never any plans. Nobody here builds like that." I said, "Then how does anybody know what it's supposed to be?" And she said, "The one who built it knows." That was the second thing that happened to me that day, and it was worse than the first. I'd come with a picture in my head, and in the picture there was a set of drawings and a bill of materials and a schedule, the way there would be on any job on Sprague Avenue, and I would sit down with it and know where I stood. Instead, there was a boat that existed in one man's memory, and the man was not there. I asked her for a table. She gave me a plastic one under the roof at the stern of my husband's boat, and I sat in that heat with the letter and a pen and my own 3 years of statements, and I did the only thing I actually know how to do. It took 2 afternoons. Line 1 was storage at $4,500 a month, billed from January 12th. The hull came onto that cradle April 14th. That's 3 months of rent on an empty cradle. 13,500 pesos. Line 4 was materials advanced. Hardwood, 2 deliveries, 96,000 pesos. I had receipts for both of those in a shoebox in Spokane with my husband's signature on them, paid direct, and I'd photographed every page before I flew, because that is what 31 years does to a person. Line 6 was a watchman at $3,000 a month for 16 months. The boat had been there 14. I went through every line twice, and when I put the pen down, I had 115,500 pesos crossed out resembles a 386,000 peso demand. Feli didn't argue, and she didn't go red in the face. She looked at the storage date and she said, "That's the day he signed for the space." I said, "Then bill him for a space, don't bill him for a boat." She was quiet a second, and then she took the pen out of my hand and put the line through it herself. I did say the obvious thing, that 3 of her 4 cradles were standing empty. She said, "Ma'am, they are empty because everybody on this coast knows what happened to the last man who left a boat here. That is what I am charging you for." We agreed on 270,500 pesos, 120,000 of it that afternoon in cash out of a bank in Batangas City with a guard at the door. The balance by August 24th. And when it was signed, I had spent about $2,100 and I owned nothing whatsoever. I did not own one plank of it. The boat sat exactly where it had sat, in her yard, under her lien, and what I had actually bought was 78 days. Now I needed hands. Understand how simple I thought this was going to be. I had a hull. The hull is the hard part, everybody says so. What was left was carpentry and an engine and paint, and I have hired trades my entire working life. You get 3 numbers, you throw out the high one and the low one, and you watch the middle one like a hawk. I took a room in Bauan over a hardware store. 12,000 pesos a month, and he wanted 4 months in front because I was a foreigner with no work and a return ticket in my bag. 48,000 to get the key. There was a plastic chair on the landing. I called Paula from that chair and told her I was staying past the 19th, and she said, "Staying until when?" And I didn't have an answer, and she said, "Okay," in the voice that isn't okay. Then I went and got my 3 numbers, and this is where the whole thing came apart. The first man was in Anilao, the next municipality over, the dive side, 20 minutes on a road that goes up and over and drops you at the water. He builds and repairs for 2 of the resorts. He came out to Bauan on a Wednesday, walked around the hull twice, stood a long time at the stern with his hand flat on the planking, and said no. Not a price. No. The second one didn't even come out. He asked on the phone who built it. I said I didn't have the name yet. He asked which yard. I told him, and he said, "Ma'am, I will call you back." And he did not call me back. The third one told me the truth, and I had to pay him for it, which is how nearly all of this went. His name was Tino, 66 years old, no shirt, a felt hat, hands like a bunch of carrots. He had worked on that hull himself the year before for a stretch, caulking. He came in on a Saturday and sat down on an overturned bucket, and I asked him what everybody's problem was. He said, "Ma'am, I don't know what's under the paint." I said, "There isn't any paint." He said, "Under the wood then, where the nails are." He said, "I didn't put those nails in. If I finish that boat and next year a plank starts, whose boat is it? It's mine. Whoever touched it last, that's whose boat it is when it goes wrong." He said it slowly and kindly, the way you'd explain something to a person from very far away, which I was. And that's not superstition, in case you were getting ready to think so. That's a man with no insurance and one reputation in a town with 2 roads in it. Then he told me the second reason, and the second reason was a name. Ruben Vergara. Everybody on that lane calls him Mang Ruben, so I did too. 54 years old, born in Bauan, building boats since he was 19 because his father did. He had built this one. He'd started it in the spring of last year with 2 young men, a hand adze, and a chainsaw he rented by the day. I said, "So where is he?" Tino wanted paying before he answered that. He wasn't holding an address hostage. He said Jean owed him for 9 days from the previous September that never got settled, and he'd been carrying it since, and he was not going to help the wife and still be carrying it. 650 pesos a day. 5,850 pesos. I paid him. He counted it, folded it, put it inside his hat, and then he told me, and there was no bad feeling on either side of that bucket. Everybody in this story took theirs, and everybody said out loud why they were taking it. And after a while, I started to prefer it to the way we do it at home. Mang Ruben had walked off the job in April, 3 days after the news reached him from Spokane. Tino said it plainly. He said, "Mang Ruben thought it was finished. Sir Jean is gone, the money stops, the boat stops." He said, "That's normal, ma'am." Then he said, "And anyway, he cannot come here." I said, "Why not?" Tino said, "Because he owes Aling Feli 68,000 pesos, and she will not let him back in the yard until it's paid." I sat with that for a day. Then I went and asked Aling Feli straight out, and she pulled a ledger out of a drawer and turned it around so I could read it. 2 years earlier, Mang Ruben had hauled another man's boat out on her Cradle and bought lumber through her account, and the job went bad, and the customer never paid him, and he ate it and never cleared it. She said, "I'm not angry with him." She said, "I like him, but I have 4 cradles, and if I let one man in on nothing, then I let everybody in on nothing." It took me most of another week to get to this. I had been thinking of that hull as an object with a price, a thing in a yard waiting on a check. It wasn't. It was a knot with 4 ropes in it. There was a person on the end of every rope, and pulling any one of them pulled all the others tight. I found Mang Ruben June 22nd in Limery, an hour overland on the other side of the point, at his sister-in-law's, sanding a set of bamboo booms for somebody else's boat for 500 pesos a day. He is not a large man, chest like a barrel, forearms out of proportion to the rest of him, and he speaks English slowly and correctly, better than he believes he does. He knew who I was before I got my name out. He wiped his hands on his shorts and said he was sorry about my husband, and he meant it. And then he didn't say anything for a while, and neither did I. Then he said the sentence that turned my whole summer over. He said, "Ma'am, that boat is not all yours." I said, "My husband paid for every board on it." He said, "Yes, Sir Jean paid for the wood and the nails and the fuel for the saw and the 2 boys." And I told him, "Don't pay me. Pay me when the boat is working." I asked him if that was written down anywhere. He looked at me the way you'd look at somebody who asked whether the sun was written down anywhere. A year of it, 6 days a week for most of that. The shape of that hull was not in a drawing, and it was not in a book. It was in his head and in his 2 hands, and he had not been paid for any of it, because the arrangement he made with my husband across a table with 2 beers on it was that he'd take his out of what the boat earned. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because I thought it myself for about a day. I thought, that's convenient. That's a story a man tells a widow. So I went to the notaries on the plaza in Bauan, the one whose name was on the yard's own demand letter, and paid 400 pesos for a certified copy of the retention clause, and got the rest of it standing at the counter for nothing, from a woman who has watched that yard file the same paper on 4 boats. She didn't blink. She said the yard's claim under 1731 is real enough. Their hauling, their sawing, their storage, their watchmen. But the amount is arguable, which I had already discovered with a pen. Then she said, and the man who built it has the same right, and his is not arguable at all, because he built it. I said, so he could stop me. She said, "Ma'am, he could have stopped you in May if he had wanted to. He didn't come. He went home and sanded somebody else's poles for 500 a day." Then she said, "And that is the first useful thing you have learned about him." That was the turn, right there at a counter on the plaza with the tricycle going past the door. Up to that minute, the question in my head had been, can I get it done in time? After it, the question was, whose boat this was going to be and what it was actually for. And it stayed that way the rest of the way. 2 days later, I went to the government and found out how far from finished I really was. The marina office in Batangas City is up a flight of stairs with a take-a-number machine and a window with a shelf at the bottom of it. I brought a folder. I'd been told to bring proof of who I was, so I brought my passport, and I went up those stairs braced for a no. I already knew the ownership part. I had asked the attorney in Spokane, and I had asked at that counter on the plaza, and both of them told me the same thing in the same bored voice. A boat is not land, and nobody was going to stop me. That was never the question I brought up those stairs. The question I brought up those stairs was whether the thing on that cradle legally existed at all. The clerk took my passport, photocopied the page, put the copy in the folder, and then he asked for the rest of the file. The agreement between the owner and the builder, the bill of materials, the general arrangement plan, the builder's certificate, notarized, signed by the builder, and the surveys, the ones an inspector does partway through while the thing is going up, so somebody official can say, yes, this is how it was built. There is no such file. There never was one. Nobody applied for permission to build that boat. Nobody drew it, and nobody official ever came down that lane to look at it. It went up on that cradle out of one man's head in the ordinary way, the way every third boat in that bay went up. He wrote the fix out for me on the back of a form, numbered, without looking up. Affidavits, a builder's certificate, a sketch plan, and then they send a surveyor. I said, and every one of those has to be signed by the builder. He said, yes, ma'am, by the builder. So there it was, and it was not what I'd been braced for. My passport was fine. The boat did not exist on paper, and the only person on earth who could make it exist was an hour up the coast, and he had every reason in the world not to hand me his signature. I paid his 68,000 pesos June 27th. I did it at the yard, at Aling Fili's desk, out of a brown envelope, and she counted it twice with the rubber band still on it, wrote one line, closed the book, and put both hands flat on the cover. She said, now he can come in. 68,000 pesos is about $1,200. It was not my debt, and it was not my husband's debt. It was a Batangas boat builder's 2-year-old bad job, and I paid it because it was the only door and there was not a second one. He came in Monday. He didn't thank me for it. That surprised me then, and later on it didn't. What he did was walk the length of the hull with the screwdriver in his hand, tapping as he went. And about 2/3 of the way aft on the starboard side, he stopped and pushed it in, and it went into the handle. He said, ma'am, come here. 14 months under a roof with a hole in it. The rain had come in over that side and run down the inside of the planking and stood in the bottom, and 3 planks at the turn of the bilge and 1 sawn frame behind them were gone. Not stained, gone. He got a thumbnail under it and peeled a strip off like the skin off a boiled potato. He said, ma'am, I told Aling Fili about that roof twice last year. He said, we bailed her out every morning we worked. You cannot bail what is already inside the wood. You cannot patch that either. You take the planks off, you cut the frame out, and you find wood. Finding wood is not a phone call. It is a man on a truck, then a man on a boat, then one specific tree. 2 of the 3 were long ones and had to come out of a good log, and the good log was on Mindoro, across the strait, and by the time it was cut and sawn and hauled, it was 88,000 pesos and 11 days I did not have. That was the first time I properly understood what August 24th was. Not a date on a letter. A wall coming toward me at a fixed speed, with all my money strapped to my back. The work itself I could watch, and I watched every day of it on a plastic chair with a hat on. I had assumed that where there are no drawings, there is chaos. There isn't. There's a stick. Ming Rubin has a length of bamboo about as long as my arm with pencil marks and little notches cut in it, and that stick is the boat. Frame spacing, the height of the shear at 3 places, the rise of the bow. He'd hold it against the hull, squint down it, and go cut something. That stick was the only copy of the plan. It lived in a shed on a nail, and there was not one office in the Republic of the Philippines that would ever accept it. The katig went on in the 2nd week of July, and that was the day it stopped looking like a bathtub and started looking like a boat. bamboo poles as thick as my thigh, 3 crossbooms over the hull, lashed and then through-bolted at the deck with stainless plate. And in the middle of all that, on a Tuesday, I found my husband's handwriting. On the inside face of the port shear plank, up under where the deck goes, in carpenter's pencil, there were 2 numbers, 4'3", and under it, crossed out hard, 4'1". That's all it was. A man who had never built anything in his life, standing in a shed, trying to write down in feet what somebody was telling him in meters, getting it wrong, and then fixing it. I sat under that boat with my hand flat on those numbers for a while. Then I got up, because the epoxy was open and it goes off in 20 minutes, and Mang Rubin was waiting on me to hold something. Paula stopped answering around July 20th. Her birthday was the week before, the one I'd promised to be home for, and I called her from the landing, and we were both very polite about it. There wasn't a fight. She went from calling on Sundays to texting on Sundays to nothing. The last real conversation we had, I told her I was wiring over the last $9,000, which was the roof money. The roof on the Spokane house is 19 years old, and I have had a bid in a drawer since March. She said, "So the boat gets a roof and you don't?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I don't know what to do with that, Mom." She wasn't being cruel, she was being accurate. Then, on August 2nd, a chandler in Batangas City handed me a list. All summer I had been building a boat in my head. Wood, engine, paint, water. What I was actually building was a boat that carries paying passengers, and that is a different animal with a different bill. Life jackets, and not 4 of them, 18. 2 fire extinguishers with brackets, ring buoys, flares. A first aid kit that gets inspected, a radio with an antenna and a license for the radio, and passenger insurance for the first year, which is not optional and is not cheap. 85,200 pesos on one piece of paper for a pile of things that don't make the boat go anywhere at all. I hadn't put a peso against any of it. In 31 years, I never once let a job come at me with a line item I hadn't seen coming, and I stood in an air-conditioned shop in Batangas City at 72 years old and got caught by the oldest trick there is. On August 6th, I sat on the landing over the hardware store with the legal pad and did the arithmetic I had been carefully not doing for about 10 days. Everything I had moved over that summer in 4 transfers came to 1,368,000 pesos. Out of it had gone the yard, the room, Tino's 9 days, Mang Rubin's 68,000, the log off Mindoro, the deck and the beams, the bamboo and the ironwork, the tank and the wiring, the epoxy and the paint and the copper, 5 weeks of 4 men's wages, the chandler, the government, and me eating and getting around. What was left was 296,000 pesos. There was more at home. I'd told Paula in June, out loud, that $24,000 was the whole of it, and I was not going to be a woman who says a number and then says a bigger one. What I still had to pay was the balance to Aling Feli by the 24th, 150,500, and an engine. Mang Rubin had already found the engine at a lot up in Malabon past Manila, where they bring Japanese surplus in by the container and stand them in rows on pallets. He had spent an entire day up there turning them over by hand, and he found a four-cylinder he trusted and could tell you exactly why, which is more than I can say for most people who have sold me something. $230,000 for the engine and the gearbox, $62,000 for the shaft, the stern tube, the coupling, and the propeller. 292,000 pesos. I had 296. So I could buy the engine, and then on August 25th, a notary would sell my husband's boat with a brand new engine sitting in it, and I would get nothing back out of whatever it brought, however far over the bill it went. Because that is how their law works, and I had known it since Spokane. Or I could pay Allingfaily and own, free and clear, in my own name, a beautiful wooden hull with bamboo outriggers and 18 life jackets that would never leave the yard, sitting on a cradle at 4,500 pesos a month. Those were the two. There was no third one that was made out of money. The third one was made out of a name. Vanjie runs the boat side for one of the dive resorts in Anilao. 40s, a woman who thinks in seats and slots. I'd been talking to her since the middle of July because a boat that size in that bay has exactly one job. 6 divers, 2 dives, back for lunch, November through April, when the wind swings around to the northeast and the water goes flat. She had offered in advance, 300,000 pesos against the season, paid on signature, because the good boats in Anilao get booked before they're wet. And she could not sign it with me. To take money for a seat on a boat, you need a permit to operate. And to hold that permit, you have to be an accredited operator. And to be accredited as a foreigner, you need a work permit from their labor department and $200,000 of paid-in capital. 200,000. 100,000 if most of your payroll is Filipino, and there are at least 15 of them, for one wooden boat with a crew of 3. I took all of it to a lawyer in Batangas City who does vessel documentation and nothing else. A woman around 50, and I'll call her Attorney Padilla because that's what every person in that building called her. Attorney first, like a rank. She read Vanjie's charter with a pen in her hand and never once told me she was sorry. I could own it. That was settled. And it was real, and it was mine. I could own it and put it on a mooring and take my friends out on it for free until the end of time. I could not be paid for it, and I could not drive it. Their constitution keeps the practice of professions for their own citizens, and a boat captain's license is a profession. And the seaman's book you need to even sit for the examination is issued to Filipino seafarers. Whoever stood at the wheel of that boat was going to be a Filipino, and it was never going to be me. Then I asked the question everybody asks, and she had been waiting for it. I said, what if the paper says his name and the boat is really mine? She said, that is a specific crime here with a specific name, and it is 5 to 15 years for him and for you both, and then they take the boat anyway. I said, then let's write something private between us, something I can hold in my hand. And she said the sentence I've repeated to myself 200 times since. She said, ma'am, the paper that would protect you is the same paper that would convict you. I sat on that plastic chair on the landing for 2 nights. Here is what I decided, and I'm not going to dress it up for you. On August 9th, I went to Mang Rubin and told him the certificate was going to say his name, his alone, off his own builder certificate and his own affidavit, with nothing anywhere on it carrying mine. Then I told him the second half, and I did not put it to him as a request. Every peso I had carried across was going on paper as a loan, secured on the boat herself. Attorney Padilla had found me the place their law keeps for it. A registered vessel can carry a mortgage. It goes on file in the same office that issues the certificate, and the man holding it does not have to be a citizen of anything. Then we sat at the same sort of table with the same 2 beers on it and argued about money for 3 hours, and it was not warm, and I did not want it to be. He opened at 1/3 of what she earned. I told him 1/3 of nothing is nothing, and I wanted a number I could count. Where we landed was 1,364,000 pesos, out of 40% of what that boat brings in after fuel and after crew every month until it's clear. That is every peso I carried across and spent, the rent and the yard and the boat in one pile. After it's clear, 1/4 of the same line for as long as she floats, and that half is on nobody's paper and never will be. He agreed to it standing up that same afternoon, and he signed the deed at the notary on the day the certificate came out, and then he put his hand out anyway, which I noticed and did not say anything about. So I am not her owner. I am her mortgagee. That is a real word with a real file number, and if the payments stop, I can go into a court in Batangas City with it, and it is the coldest thing I have ever been to something I paid for. The engine went in the following week, and it took the last of my money, 292,000 pesos out of 296. There was no shaft log in her at all, so they built the deadwood up and bored it with a length of pipe and a hand brace and 2 men leaning on it, and it took 9 hours. She ran for the first time on the Cradle on the 19th out of a bucket and sounded like a truck. The surveyor came August 21st, measured her, and said she came in below 15 gross tons, which is the number everything else hangs off of. The plan he needed, I drew. 3 afternoons on that Cradle with 100-foot tape and a pad of graph paper, marking stations every meter and taking the width and the depth at every one, then inking it up over the hardware store. A general arrangement plan of a boat that already existed, drawn backwards by an office manager from Spokane. The clerk looked at it for about 4 seconds and stamped it, and I understood it had never been the drawing anybody wanted. It was the signature at the bottom, and the signature was not mine. The certificate of ownership came out of that office on August 22nd with Ruben Vergara's name on it. I was standing beside him when the clerk slid it across, and he took it in both hands and read it twice. Vanjie signed her charter with him an hour later on the hood of her truck. 300,000 pesos on signature. 150,500 of it went down that lane and cleared the balance at Aling Feli's desk before the yard opened on the 23rd, 1 day inside the 90, and she ruled it off in the ledger with a red pen and turned the book around so I could read it, which by then was only a habit between us. Notice what did that. It was not my money. My money was already in an engine. What paid off that yard was a signature from a woman in Anilao who would not put her resort's name beside mine, and could put it beside his. Aling Feli wanted her cradle back the hour the lien cleared, and I had 4,000 pesos left in the world and no way to pay another month of storage. We put her in the water on August 23rd, the day before the wall. They did something at the stem before it was light. I wasn't there for it. Nobody offered to tell me, and I didn't ask. When I came down the lane at 6:30, there was a wet mark on the bow post and a bowl beside it, and a priest from town setting up a small table with a cloth over it. He blessed her with holy water in front of about 90 people, and they were there because it was a launching. And in that town, a launching is something you go to. Rice and pens sit on 2 folding tables under the roof. A speaker on a chair playing music far too loud for 7 in the morning. She came down on greased planks with round poles under her, in short lurches, with maybe 40 men on ropes and 1 man out front counting. And the counting is the part I still hear. Everybody pulls on the same syllable. It took 15 minutes to move her 9 meters, and then the last of it happened fast enough to frighten me. And she went in stern first and sat down deep and rode up, and 90 people made a sound I have never heard anybody make at anything in the United States. The name was on the bow in blue letters with a white shadow, done by a sign painter from town who charged me double because it was a Sunday. Amihan. That's the wind that comes out of the northeast starting in November and lays that water flat and brings the divers. I named her for a wind that hadn't started blowing yet. And then I stood in the mud in my sandals and watched a boat I had paid for float away from me in every sense there is. People ask me what it came to and then look at their shoes while I answer. Here it is, all of it, in one column. I moved 1,368,000 pesos across the water and spent all but 4,000 of it. And the roof off my own house is in there, and then I put her in another man's name, a man I had known 7 weeks. The only paper on this earth with my name on it says I am owed money by a boat builder in Batangas, and I did that awake, on purpose, at 72 years of age, in an air-conditioned office, with a lawyer sitting 3 feet away telling me exactly what I was doing. I went out on her once. The morning after the launch, out past the point toward the dive sites, 6 of us aboard and nobody diving, just to run the engine up and see what she'd do. I sat on the bench on the port side with my hands on my knees, like a passenger, because that is what I am and what I will always be on that boat. Mang Rubin was at the wheel, where he has to be. He put her over hard both ways to see how the katig took it, and the bamboo on the inside lifted clean out of the water and came back down, and she never once hesitated. I flew home September 4th. Here's where it actually stands, and I'd rather hand it to you cold than let you fill it in kindly. The season starts in November. It is not November. I have had nothing back, not 1 peso, and I won't have a number until the first month closes and he tells me what the number is. I'll have no way of checking it, not ever, not from Spokane, Washington. The mortgage is real and it is filed, and what it entitles me to is a lawsuit in a court in Batangas City, 15 hours the other side of my kitchen, against the only man alive who can make that boat earn anything. My whole position is 40% of an accounting done in a language I don't read. Paula and I talk, It's short and it's careful. She thinks I was robbed, politely, over 3 months, in order, by everybody. And she can't use the word because I'm her mother. She isn't entirely wrong, and I know it, and that's why we're careful. The roof is still 19 years old. There's a photograph of a mooring on my phone, and I have not shown it to one person in Spokane because the first question would be what it cost, and the second one would be why, and I only have an answer for the first. And here's the one I have nowhere to put. My last week there, cleaning out a cabinet in the yard office, Aling Feely handed me a life vest in a plastic bag. Women's small. There isn't a woman on that coast it would fit, and there was nothing else like it in the building. She said, Sir Jean brought it. She didn't know when, no receipt, no date, nothing written on it anywhere. So he meant me to be on it. That is everything that vest tells me, and it is the whole of what I've got. It doesn't tell me why he never said one word about any of it for 3 years, or whether he ever meant to, or whether he was waiting for her to float so he could bring me over and show me instead of explain it. I've had a month and a half with that and gotten exactly nowhere, and I don't expect to. And I've made a kind of peace with a question that has no bottom in it. I know what she cost. I know precisely what I own, which is a lien and a wind that hasn't come yet. You tell me whose boat that is. The certificate says his name, the mortgage says I paid for her, and my hands say a third thing that neither piece of paper has a line for.